Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another video on Journey to Wholeness. And today we are talking about imperfect people, how God uses imperfect people. And I have two examples from the Bible, and we're going to start with David. Everybody knows the story of David and Goliath, how David killed Goliath with the slingshot. And I'm just going to give a little bit of the backstory on how David was anointed to be king. So there was a king before David named Saul, and God wanted Saul to go out and kill a group of people named the Amalekites. But Saul didn't kill everyone. God wanted him to kill everybody, like cat, the dog, mom, dad, babies, everything. But Saul didn't kill the king, and he also kept some of the cattle for himself. So that was displeasing to God, and God rejected Saul as king. So God sent Samuel, a prophet, to go out and anoint the new king. So Samuel went to a place called Bethlehem where this man named Jesse lived. And Jesse has 7 sons, and David is one of those sons. So Jesse brought, um, his sons forth to Samuel, and he left David in the field who was tending sheep. He didn't even call David. And Samuel is getting ready to anoint the kings, but none of them were it. Like, none of them was it. And he was like, do you have anybody else? Is there somebody else? Is there somebody missing? And Jesse was like, yeah, I got a son named David, but he's in the field tending sheep. And David would be in the field every day tending to the sheep, and he'd be praying to God, talking to God, singing to God. David and God are like best friends. They're like two peas in a pod. And David is out there minding his business, and his dad calls him in front of Samuel, and God was like, this is the one. Like, this is the one. You can anoint him as king. But we also know that, well, you may not know, but as time goes on and David is anointed king, one day he is in the palace while all of his other king friends are out fighting in war. But he decided to stay at the palace, and he went up on the roof. And on the roof, he saw a woman named Bathsheba, and she was up there taking a bath. And David looked over and was like, I'm going to go get her. So David sent someone to go get her. And he ends up sleeping with this woman. And this woman is married. And in the midst of them sleeping together, she gets pregnant. And she is also married to one of David's men named Uriah. So when Bathsheba comes back to tell David, like, I'm pregnant and everything, David summons her husband and was like, you should go home, spend time with your wife, so like when the story comes out that she's pregnant, it'll look as if it's Uriah's. But Uriah refused to go home. He was like, nah, like, all my peeps are here, camping out. Like, how can I go home and be with my wife and everybody is here, doing our job. So he didn't go. So David tried to get Uriah drunk and was like, yeah, you go home to your wife, and Uriah was like, nah, I'm not going. Like, I'm just not going. Like, I'm gonna stay here. And he ends up falling asleep at the camp. So then David sends a message to one of his right hand men and was like, in the next battle, put Uriah out front. And Uriah is put out front, and in the next battle, he is killed. So David slept with a married woman. She became pregnant, and he killed her husband. And with this being about imperfect people, David is the same man in the Bible that wrote, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And there are generations in the Bible that came after David that God kept promises to because of who David was as a man and his heart posture toward God. So it's like, even though David wasn't perfect, he committed adultery, he got another woman pregnant, and he killed her husband. David was still used by God because of his heart posture. It wasn't because he did everything, right. It wasn't because he didn't make mistakes. It wasn't because he never failed, but it was because of his relationship with God and his heart posture toward God. And I don't say this for this to be an excuse to sin, to mess up all the time purposely, because we know that God will forgive us, and He will. But we just want to keep in mind that we don't want to take that forgiveness for granted. And then I have another story of a man named Moses, and everybody kind of knows the backstory, a little bit of the backstory of Moses on how God sent him to the Egyptian king Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. But before Moses, was called by God, Moses is a Hebrew, and at the time, the Egyptian king was killing all the Hebrews because he feared that if they multiplied too numerously, that if there was ever a war to break out, that they would turn against him and join the enemy and like overthrow him or kill him. So he was afraid of that. So he was ordering people to kill all the Hebrew babies. Like, you can keep the girls, but kill all the boys. And he ordered these midwives to do that, but because they feared God, they was like, nah, we're not going to kill the baby boys. We're going to let them live. And Moses was one of the babies that was allowed to live. So his mother hid him for a few months, and when she couldn't hide him no more, she sent him in a basket down a river. And Pharaoh's daughter was the one that found Moses, and she allowed a Hebrew woman to nurse him until he was old enough. And the Hebrew woman gave him back to Pharaoh's daughter, and he was raised in an Egyptian household, but he was a Hebrew man. So one day, Moses is older, and he saw that an Egyptian was beating a Hebrew, and he's originally Hebrew. So he went over to break up the fight, but he killed the Egyptian in the midst of, breaking up the fight. So the next day, he saw two Hebrews fighting. And he went out and he was like, why are you guys fighting each other? And the Hebrews were like, who are you to tell me that we shouldn't be fighting? Are you going to kill us like how you killed the Egyptian? And Moses was scared, and he was like, oh no, like, what if people found out what I've done? So he went on the run because, some people knew that he killed an Egyptian. And Pharaoh tried to kill him and story. So in the midst of the adultery and the murder and the sins and the mistakes, God still called Moses, and God still chose David as king, and God still allowed David to be king. And there were generations after David that were being blessed and that were being protected by God because of the kind of king that David was. So, it's not that you never make mistakes or you'll never mess up, but it's about the kind of relationship that you have with God. So if you feel like you're imperfect, or you feel like you've done it all, you've been everywhere you shouldn't have been, that doesn't separate you from the love of God, and that doesn't separate you from the call that He may have put on your life, or the assignment that He may have gave you. So in this video, I just hope that people understand that your imperfections or your failures or your biggest mistakes don't stop God from loving you or being with you or walking with you, but it's about your heart.